Hey there guys, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the CodeLab channel. Now in this video we're going to be taking a look at web design. Despite web design actually being its own kettle of fish, it is in my opinion a skill all modern web developers should have a basic understanding of. This is because there are many crossovers between web design and web development. So what we're going to do in this video is go over my 8 ingredients for awesome web design so we can turn this basic design website that you see on your screens here now. So there's 5 different sections here, and what we're going to do is use the 8 ingredients and turn this basic design into this well designed one that you can see here on your screen now, with the overall goal here being to transform you into a developer who also designs. Now just before we get started guys, if you enjoyed the video please give it a like and consider subscribing to the CodeLab channel as I post weekly content, and make sure you turn on notifications so you guys never miss an update. So before we get into the 8 different ingredients for awesome web design, it's probably best to explain the difference between web design and web development first, because a lot of people confuse the two terms. So web design refers to those who design and create the look and feel of websites that are displayed on the internet that you see every day, whereas web developers implement that design using HTML, CSS and JavaScript or another programming language. Now as I mentioned, there is a massive crossover between the two and they complement each other pretty well, so combining the two is actually super beneficial in becoming a pro at programming. Now when it comes to web design, there are some basic goals here to talk about. So a website that has good design should create an immediate and lasting impression on that website. It should make the user trust that brand or product while also increasing the user's perceived value of that product or brand, and essentially just gives users exactly what they're looking for when it comes to the site. So for example, purchasing a product or finding out information. Whereas websites with bad design makes users believe that the brand doesn't really care about their product or service, and it can make the user insecure about trusting that brand, while also coming across as the brand or product seeming cheap and can leave users confused. Alright guys, so with all that boring stuff out of the way, we can start now getting down to the nitty gritty of this video and start looking at our 8 ingredients for awesome web design. Now it's very important that you have all of these ingredients in mind at the same time when you're making your website designs, but also a quick disclaimer that these are only guidelines that are used and you don't have to strictly follow them. You apply whatever you feel is comfortable in what you think is best for your website, but these can be and should be great reference points for you guys. So the first ingredient regarding awesome web design is applying beautiful typography. Now we need to understand 2 things before we look at the rules regarding typography. The first rule is what exactly is typography. So typography is described as the art and technique of arranging type to make written language legible, readable and appealing when displayed. Basically meaning it's all about text being beautiful and easy to read. Now the other concept we need to look at is the 2 writing types of serif and sans serif. So what exactly is the difference between the two? Now fortunately recognizing the difference is pretty easy. The answer is simply in the name. A serif font is a decorative stroke that finishes off the end of a letter's stem, sometimes also called as feet of the letters, as you can see here in this example. And the serif font is more ornamental and creates a more traditional look and feel, and is very good for long text. Now sans serif on the other hand is essentially the opposite of serif. It doesn't have those curves and is more popular in the modern day. It's pretty clean and simple, and most beginners will likely deploy sans serif. Now rules regarding the 2 typefaces is that you should always really play it safe and use popular typefaces. So for serif you've got popular ones like Merriweather, Alio, Cormorant and Cardio, and for sans serif you've got popular ones like Lato, Inter, Roboto or WorkSans. And you can easily get these typefaces on Google Fonts, which I'll be displaying in just a moment. Now another rule is that you should really limit yourself to 2 typefaces if possible, because if you start implementing more typefaces you can easily lose track of the design and it can give it an amateur look. And when it comes to choosing the right typeface, this is all dependent on what your website is about. Then of course you can base your typeface around that. So those were the basics of typefaces. Now the next major level is choosing font sizes. Now when you're thinking about which choices to make when using font size, you should really limit your choices. This is so you don't really get confused later on throughout your project when you're trying to find the right font size for that particular situation. So to help you with font size, you should use a typescale tool, which is essentially a reference tool that you can use to help you when you're choosing the right font size for that particular situation of your project. Now you can go on the internet and find a typescale tool, or you can use a predefined one that you see on the screen right now, and this is the actual one we're going to be using in the example I'm just going to be demonstrating in a moment. And this is going to be super beneficial for us because we won't get stuck in the loop of having to think about which font size we should use for that particular occasion. Now a couple of general rule of thumbs for size and font weights. For normal text, you should use something between 16 pixels and 32 pixels. And by normal text, I mean things like text on a navigation bar or just general text throughout your website. For longer text, so things like blog posts, you should use 20 pixels and up. And then of course for headlines, use text on the larger scale as you want these to stand out the most. And about 600 font weight for headlines. And then for normal text, you want something around 400 weight. Now a few general rule of thumbs for reading experiences. You should use less than 65 characters per line. For normal text size, line height should be between 1.5 and 1.8. For bigger text, go below 1.5. And a really good tip is that the smaller or longer the text, the larger the line height needs to be. Alright guys, so before we start implementing good typography, let's first look at the different sections of the website first. So this website is for a travel agent company called Wonderful World, and the crux of this website and company is basically just finding the perfect holiday for that individual or a couple or a family. And the first section that you see here is just the landing page. So we have text on the left here, and then we have an image to the right. If we scroll down, we have a section for the most popular destinations. So 3 destinations of Corfu, Paris and New York, and each of them have their own different bits of information regarding that holiday, as well as the prices and the anchor tag, which is going to be styled as a button for book now. Then if we scroll down to the next section, it's the section for what makes our holiday so special. So it's really good at creating lasting memories. There's a first class service to the website and the company, and you're guaranteed to have fun. Then the last section here is just a testimonial. So there's the couple to the left, and then there's the content of the review they wrote to the right. And then the last section is just the footer. So really simple, it's just a copyright text. Now, because this website is quite a modern website, I want to give it a clean and modern look. So going back to the slides regarding serif and sans serif, we want to use a sans serif font for this, because again, I want to give this a modern look. And the sans serif font I'm going to be using for this website is going to be the Roboto. So let's head inside Google Fonts and grab the Roboto font. So we're inside Google Fonts here, and as you can see, there's so many different fonts. You can come on here and browse and choose for your website. Again, for our example, we're going to be using the Roboto font, so we'll click onto this, and the style we're going to pick is the regular 400. So select this style, and let's also grab the medium 500 style, select this one, and let's also grab the bold 700. So the cool thing about Google Fonts is that it gives you the link that you can apply in the HTML, and also shows you how to apply the font inside your CSS style sheet. So the first thing we're going to do is just grab this link and go back into VS Code and insert this inside the head tags in our HTML file. So we're back inside VS Code, and we'll go above the style sheet and just paste that in there. And I'm just going to tab this over to give it a cleaner look. Now to implement this, we need to head inside the style sheet and go where the general styles section is, and inside the body tag here, you can see we've already applied an Arial font to our website, and if the browser doesn't support Arial, it will use Helvetica. Now because we want to implement Roboto, we'll get rid of Helvetica and Arial, and as Google Fonts showed us, we'll use single quote marks, and then we'll just type in the font, which in this example is Roboto. Now as you can see in our example, the change is subtle, but in my opinion already looks a lot better than the Arial font. So now we've implemented our typeface, the Roboto typeface. If we scroll to the top of the style sheet, you can see we have our font size system here. So it goes from 10 pixels all the way to 98 pixels. So this is just that predetermined font size system that I spoke about in the slides just a moment ago. And with this system, we can now easily choose font sizes for our content, instead of having to always think and guess what to give our content in regards to font size, which will more than likely lead to inconsistent results. So from this type scale system, let's start applying it to our content. So the first bit of content I want to apply this system to is this H1 here. So for the H1s, we want the font size to be bigger. So we're going to grab 44 to 58 pixels, copy that, scroll down to that H1, which is here, and then just go inside that H1, and I'm just going to paste those numbers in here. Go underneath here, grab the font size property, and let's first give 44 pixels a go. And as you can see, it's already looking better, but it's just a bit too small for this occasion. So let's try 52 pixels. Now that does look better, but I want the dream holiday to be on the same line. So if we go to 58 pixels, and as you can see, the dream holiday now is in the same line, and the 58 pixels I think looks really good for this example. Now, as well as font size, if we think back to the slides, we also want to affect the line height and the spacing between the letters. So first we'll deal with the line height, and with big headings you want the line height to be quite small, so we'll say 1.1 here, and as you can see that looks a little better and more natural. Now we'll also affect the spacing between the letters, so we'll grab the letter spacing property, and we want this to be smaller again to give it a more natural look, so we'll use negative, let's say 2 pixels first, and that looks a little bit too squashed for me, so we'll try 1 pixel, and that in my opinion now looks a lot better. So that's it for our H1. Now the normal text below this, which is this bit of content here, this has a typical base of 16 pixels, but let's go back to the type scale and just grab, let's grab from 18 to 24. So we'll copy that, go down to the header text, so it's this section here, and we'll just paste those numbers in here, and then font size. So let's try 18 pixels, which I think is a bit too small. Let's see what 20 pixels looks like. And I think that looks really good actually, so we're going to stick with 20 pixels. Now with normal text, if we remember back to the slide, the magical rule of thumb, the smaller or longer the text, the larger the line height should be. So we'll go down and insert a line height property, and let's say 1.6, so a bit of space, and you can see that immediately looks a lot better. So we'll keep line height at 1.6. Now as for this bit of content here, this is going to be styled as a button, which we're going to be looking at a bit later on, so we won't actually touch this text yet. But the next bit is going to be the H2s, so the headings for all of the subsections, so popular destinations and what makes our holidays special. So these H2s are actually in the general styles, so we'll go above margin bottom here. And then let's actually go up to our font size system. So for the H2s, let's choose between 24 and 36. So we'll just copy that and we'll paste that in here. Grab the font size property and let's start with 24 pixels. See what that looks like. It's a bit too small. Let's try 36 pixels, and I think that looks pretty good. So we'll leave it at 36. Now because all of this is on one line, we don't really need line height, but what I want to do is just remove some of the spacing between the letters. So we'll say letter spacing, let's put -1 pixel, see what that looks like. And yeah, I think that looks a lot better, so it gives it a more natural look. So that's it for the H2s for each of the sections. Now we'll go down and you see we have some headings for our favourite holidays, so Corfu, Paris and New York. But firstly, I just want to make these images all the same size, so we'll go to the image and we'll give this a height of, let's say 30%, maybe 40% actually. Yep, so let's style these headings here. So heading, I think they're H3s, yep, they're H3s. So for these headings, they're going to be a bit smaller, so the base should probably be around 20 to 30. Let's just grab that and let's paste it in here. So this may be a bit repetitive, but it's really good to drill this in, and it really encourages good practice. So we'll say font size here. So let's try 24 pixels. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So we'll leave it at 24 pixels. Now another thing I want to do is actually emphasize the prices, so we'll make these a bit bigger too. So let's choose, let's say 18 to 24 for this one, so not bigger than the H3s but just a bit bigger, and make them a bit more bolder actually, so add a bit more weight to them. So holiday price, paste those in here, and let's just say font size, let's try 20 pixels. Maybe 24, see what that looks like. Yeah, a bit too big, we'll stick with 20 pixels. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Let's also add a bit more font weight to this. So let's try about 750, and that looks pretty good. Oh, I need to change that to a dollar, not a euro. So let's change this price to dollars instead of euros. So that should be it for our most popular destinations. Oh, I shouldn't add the height to the general images. I should add it to the holiday images. So let's give these a height of, what was it, 40%. So those go bigger, but those now become the same size. Now the next bit of styling is the paragraphs for these sections here. Now I like the font size for these, but I want to just add a bit of line height. So I think this is under special text, so let's just change the line height. So with normal text, again, you want the line height to be a bit bigger, so we'll say 1.6, see what that looks like. Maybe 1.5, yeah, I think that looks good. So that's it for that section. Now the testimonial. Now for this, I want this to span across that whole column there, so we'll go to testimonial section, and the text is under testimonial box, I think. Yeah, so testimonial box, we'll say grid column span 2, and then let's apply some styles to the text here. So let's I think we should make this a bit smaller. I think it's a bit too big for that section, so we'll go underneath the H2, and we'll grab a font size, and let's grab 18 to 24, and go down to testimonial, paste that in here. So let's first start with 20 pixels. That's a bit too small, let's try 24. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. So let's do the same thing for the text. I think let's make the text actually a bit smaller. So the base should be 16. So we'll do, let's just do 14 pixels. So font size, let's say 14 pixels. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. So let's also add some line height to this. So 1.5. And that looks a lot better, I think, in my opinion. And then let's, for the names, let's make those a bit smaller too. So let's say font size, if that testimonial is 14 pixels, let's say 12 pixels. We want this to be the smallest part. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, as for the footer, I think the footer for the font size looks pretty good. What I want to do is just center it. So we're going to say text align to the center. And I think that's pretty good for the footer there. And I think that's it, guys. So that's how we can implement good typography. And of course, at the moment, it doesn't look like we've changed much, but I promise you we've actually made quite a big forward step here for our website. Now, the next ingredient you need to give a lot of consideration to is colors. Now, working with colors can actually be a bit tricky, but following these guidelines, it can have a really drastic effect on your websites. Now, regarding colors, you need to keep in mind that there are many misconceptions about the psychology of color, and it's more important to focus on colors that complement your overall design and tone of your website, as well as aligning your color scheme with your brand and the message you want to convey to your audiences. So the number one rule for colors, and I can't stress this enough, is that you should choose a color that matches your website's feel and personality, because colors, as I just mentioned, convey a lot of meaning, and subconsciously we all know this. So for example, if you have a website for something serious and professional, you wouldn't have a bubbly color like pink or yellow, whereas something for a kid's website, you'd require bright, flamboyant colors. So in regards to colors and conveying meaning, you see here the different emotions and feelings colors can convey. So if you want to pause the video and take a closer look at these and apply them to your website, feel free to do so, and then you can come back to the video when you decide which color is right for your website. Now, once you have your base color, you should find a color toner, and make sure you find a great color toner. And in my opinion, you should never ever use VS Code color picker or just use named colors, because remember, colors is crucial in giving your users the right message that you want to relay, and that is most relevant to your website. So make sure you take your time with this. So once you've established your color toner, you should create a color palette. So you've got two colors here, a main color and a gray color. It's usually more than enough. Now, gray doesn't typically mean a gray color here, it just basically means a darker color. And on top of this color palette, you should create a darker and lighter tones of your colors. Now, in regards to when you should use colors, colors are really there to draw attention to users. So as you can see in this example, much of the attention draws to the buttons because their main colors are prominent, and these also strategically combine images and illustrations, as you can see here with the dog, as the colors complement the color of the dog. Now another guideline is that you should never make your text completely black because it just adds a bit more cutthroat and seriousness to them. You should aim to lighten them up a bit. So now it's time to use some of the guidelines we've just learned and applying it to our website. So the first thing we need to do is get our base color. Now of course, I sound like a broken record here, but when you're choosing your colors, again, you should definitely take your time when deciding which color is right for your website. Now for this example, I've already gone through this thought process already. And what I've done is thinking back to the colours that convey meaning and emotion in our slide. I felt blue was the right pick as this conveyed trust, confidence and loyalty. And this is exactly what I want our customers to feel when they're coming onto this website and choosing this travel agent. So again, I already have my colour tone, but I'm going to show you guys where I briefly get my colour tones. So what we're going to do is head over to OpenColor. So OpenColor is a really good website. You can come on here, find the colour that you chose for your website, copy the hex code and implement it into your style sheet. Now the really good thing about this website is that you can see in all of the colors there's a lighter and darker tint. So thinking back to our color palette, you can choose a lighter and darker color here, so it's already accessible to us. Now again, I already have my main color, but while we're here we might as well choose our grey color. So as I mentioned, this doesn't necessarily have to be grey, but for this example it will be a shade of grey that I'll be using for our text, because if you remember back to the slide, you should never really make text strictly black. So the color grey I'm going to choose is the grey 8. So what you need to do is just copy this hex and then go back inside VS Code, and what I'm going to do is go inside this comment here where it says colors, and I'm going to have one for grey color and just paste that hex code in there so we always have access to it. And then just above this I'm just going to have a comment for main color or base color, it doesn't really matter, but I'll just paste that base color in there. So now we've got our colors, we can start implementing them. So the first thing we'll do is just make all of this text the grey color. So we'll go inside the body here, grab the color property and then just paste this grey color in there. And as you can see now, our text isn't completely black, it's got that nice grey color, and I think already looks a lot better. So now it's time to start using the base color here, and what we're going to apply the base color to is actually all of the buttons, which are actually links but they're styled as buttons. So we've got the main button here, or the first button that you see, then we've also got 3 buttons each for the popular destinations. Now the buttons in the index.html, you can see have a general class of BTN and also an individual class of BTN big. This is because we're going to style this button here a little bit differently to these buttons, and these buttons actually have a their own individual class of button small. So we'll head inside the style sheet and let's put these in, let's just put these in the general section. So we're going to grab the class of BTN, which is grabbing all of the buttons, and we're just going to first give them a background color of that primary color. So it's this color here, or the main color, and we'll just paste that hex code in there. Now the next thing I want to do is just change the color of the text to white. So just triple F should change the color of the text. Now what I also want to do is remove the default styling for the anchor tag, which is that underline. So say text decoration, set this to none, and then from here let's also make it uppercase. So text transform, say uppercase, and then let's give this some padding. So padding, we'll say 16 pixels, oh not 1 pixel, 16 pixels on the top and bottom, and then let's say about 30 pixels on the left and right. Now there should actually be some space between the text and the button here, but the reason this isn't happening at the moment is because the anchor tag is an inline element, and the thing with inline elements is that vertical space doesn't actually apply here, so we need to make this an inline block item. So we'll set the display value to inline block, and what you should see now is just a little bit more space between the button and the text, and that in my opinion now just looks a lot better. And then finally let's just make the text a bit more bolder, so font weight, and we'll use that which one was it, the 500 bold for this, the one that we selected on Google Fonts. So we'll just set the 500 in here, and that button I think now looks really good. Now if we scroll down to the other buttons, you can see that these buttons just look too big for this section, and just don't look that nice at all. So what we need to do is change the styling for these buttons. Now, as I mentioned, the buttons in this section and the button here actually have their own individual class. So it was button big and button small. So what we're going to do is go underneath BTN and grab those classes. So we're going to have button big, and then we'll have BTN for small. Now what I'm going to do here is just change the font size and the padding for these buttons. So for the BTN big, what we'll do actually is first just see what the font size of let's 16 to 20 looks like. So we'll paste that in here. So we'll try 18 pixels for the font size. Let's try 20 pixels. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. So we'll do the same thing for button small, but we want the text to be smaller, so we'll probably choose between 8 to 16. So let's grab those and change those. So let's try let's first try 12, and I think that looks pretty good. So what I want to do now is just remove the padding of these buttons. So for the smaller buttons, let's just remove the padding. So let's try 12 pixels by let's say 18. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to change a few things here, just because on the HTML, just because there's a few differences there. So it's per person, and it's also $1. Just so it's consistent and it all looks the same. So actually I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing I want to apply the base color to is actually a whole section, and the section we're going to apply it to is this testimonial section here. So we'll go back inside the style sheet and go down to the testimonial section, and this is all wrapped in, what's it wrapped in? Testimonial section. So we'll go inside here and we'll just say background color. And what's really good about VS Code is that once we implement it once, it's always going to throw the colors to us, so it's easy to access. So we'll just paste that in there. And then of course we need to change the color of the text again. So we'll go underneath the color here, change this color to white. And then let's also give this some padding. So we'll say padding, let's say 25 pixels all the way around, so it's a bit of breathing space. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And as you can see, adding these colors is just a crucial step in getting the website to really start coming to life. And it's really helping us convey a strong, emotional, positive response for our users, so they can trust this website and trust its services. Now, the third ingredient for awesome web design is working with images. Now, in modern day web development, images are really crucial, and I don't think I've come across a website in a long time that doesn't have an image associated with a website. So again, like colors, there's a huge emphasis here on implementing images for your websites. Now, there are different types of images for websites. So you've got product photos, which are basically just, as the name suggests, illustrates a product being sold. There's storytelling photos, basically photos that help convey your message of the website, similar to our website. There's illustration photos, basically just an abstract way of doing storytelling. And then you've got patterns, and these usually appear as part of backgrounds for entire sections, which is just a cool way to add interesting visual detail and kind of make them less boring. Now, a few guidelines to look over is that when we're using images, you should use images to support the message and the story, basically meaning that you should use images that make sense. So there's no point using images that have no correlation to your design or website. So in our example, a travel agent company, there's no point having images about things like furniture, as they just wouldn't really make any sense. Now, as well as message and story, you should aim to use original images if possible, but if you can't use original images or don't have any, then use stock photos. But when using stock photos, you should use ones that are relevant, and where I get my stock photos are from places like Pexels or Unsplash. And in fact, the images from our website example all from Pexels. Now, a couple of other things here. When we're using images, it's important to use them well. So if your website has people in it, use real people and authentic people, not fake overproduced models, because real people actually help to trigger human emotions. And also guys, if your image is too large, don't be afraid to crop the image if you need to. So looking at our website, you can see the images are just relevant to that particular section. So dream holiday, this looks like a sort of dreamy holiday that people might like to go to. Scroll down to our popular destinations. You see these are actually images of those locations. It wouldn't make sense of having different locations. If we scroll down to the next section, you can see for this bit, you can see we have lasting memories, so photographs, first class service, so people just working hard for this company, and then guaranteed fun, these guys just having a load of fun by the sea. And then if we scroll down to the last image, you can see that it's a normal couple here and these people are just authentic and real, whereas if we had models in here, it just wouldn't really make sense and it wouldn't complement the point of the section where it's trying to give a detailed review. Now, another thing that's important about images is how we handle text and images together, because this can become a bit of an issue later on where it's harder to actually read your text because of the image itself. So let's take a look at 3 methods of tackling this issue if you run into it in the future. So the first thing you can do is just darken the image so you can see the text more clearer, as you can see in this example. So if we look at the first example to the left, you can see it's a bit too bright for the text and the text is a bit harder to read. But to our right, the image is actually dark and the text is actually clearer to see. Now the next method is just putting your text in a box. So like you see in this example, which looks pretty good and clear, and the text is really easy to read and the image also looks good. And then the last method is just placing the text in a neutral section, as you can see here in this example. So the text is really clear to see and the images also look really good. Now, another important aspect of images is pretty advanced and too technical for this video, but I do have another video which is called Mastering Responsive Images, which is devoted to these 3 topics here if you guys want to check that out, and a link should pop up on the screen right now. Now, our next ingredient is working with icons and how we can use them. Now, icons are great because they add subtle detail which can drastically change the look and feel of your website. Now, a couple of things to get started with finding icons is that you should always find a good icon pack, and the one I use is Font Awesome, and that's the one we're going to be using in this example. Now, there are other icon packs, but I would try and avoid mixing icon packs because they can look different and it could just sort of hinder the positive impact icons can have. Now, another good thing about using icon packs is that they're vector based, meaning that they can be scaled to different sizes without becoming blurred or pixelated. Now, it's really tempting to use images and icons like JPEGs and PNG, but again, the issue with these is that if you try and scale them in size, they'll become pixelated and just won't look good at all. Now, when you're using icons, it's really good to associate them with actions. So you have an icon which relates to that particular text in some way. And the really good thing about doing that is that it provides a visual assistance to that text. And then another really cool effect of icons is using them for bullet points or check marks or crosses. Alright guys, so the first thing we need to do is get our icon pack, and the icon pack I use is Font Awesome. So if I want to get the icons from Font Awesome, I'll just go into Google search, type in Font Awesome CDN, I'll click on the first link, and then you see this link here, I'll just copy the link tag, and then what we do is paste this on our HTML. So we'll go back inside our HTML file now. So we're back inside VS Code, and what I'm going to do is just paste this underneath Google Fonts, and I'm also just going to put a comment here so it's more readable. So this is Font Awesome, and I'll just quickly do the same for Google Fonts. Again, you don't have to do this, but this is just this just makes it a bit clearer to read. So the next thing we're going to do is go back inside Google and go inside the Font Awesome website, so I can show you guys how we can extract the icons from Font Awesome. So we're inside Font Awesome and we're inside the icons tab, and what you can do from here is scroll through all of the different icons you can use. Now, the majority of them are on the Pro subscription, but if we click on the free link here, it will show you all the icons that are for free, and there's so many to choose from, so don't be disheartened by the fact that there's a Pro subscription. There's more than enough icons here that you can use for your projects. So you can come on here and pick an icon which is relevant to your design. So I'm just going to click on the Android icon, and then the way we'd link this inside our HTML is Font Awesome's pretty good. It will give you the icon with a class that's associated with this icon. So you can just copy this, and then we'll go back inside our index.html inside VS Code. Then you come inside your index.html and then just paste that icon wherever you'd want it to be within your website design. Now, I've got icons already inserted from Font Awesome in our most popular destinations. So you'll see here they're just before all of the list items or all of the spans. So if we scroll down to our most popular destination, you can see now all of those icons. Now thinking back to our slide, you can see how we're using the icons now. They're providing visual assistance for our text, and as well as providing visual assistance, they're also associating with actions. So we've got leisure and relaxing, so we've got a person inside a hot tub, which is nice and relaxing. We've got heart shape for the romance section. We've also got a knife and fork for breakfast and lunch. And you can really see how even the subtleness of these icons are actually adding quite a lot to this section, which is what we're aiming to do. Now what I'm going to do from here is actually change the color of these icons to our base color, so we're keeping up with the theme, and I'm also just going to get rid of some of the default styling and make the icons a bit bigger. So if we head into the style sheet and we scroll down to our favorite destinations, which is our popular destinations here, the first thing I want to do is just remove the default styling for the list items, which is those bullet points. So holiday details, airlines, so list items. So we'll go inside here, and then we just use the property of list style, set this to none, and that will get rid of the bullet points. And then what I want to do is grab the icons, so the icons are inside the list items, so we'll go inside the icons here, and the first thing I want to do is actually place them on top of the text. So to do that, we want to set the display value to block, because by default icons are inline elements, so we'll just say display block. And again, to keep up with the theme, I'm just going to make them the same color as our base color, so change the color of these to that nice light bluish color. And then finally, all I want to do is just make these a bit bigger, so we'll go up to the font size system, because with icons we scale them up in size with the font size property. So what I want to do is grab 16 to 20 pixels, and then go back down to the icon, and then we'll just paste that in here and grab the font size property, and let's start with 20 pixels. I think that's a bit too big. Let's try 18 pixels. Perfect, and I think that looks pretty good. So what I want to do now is just add a little bit of margin between the text and the icon, so we'll say about 5 pixels. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good, guys. And as you can see, just the subtle introduction of icons can really bring a section of your website design to life and add more vibrance to that section. Now the fifth ingredient for awesome web design is shadows. Now shadows can be a useful way to add interesting visual details to our designs, which we'll see in just a moment, but they can also be useful in helping users figure out the relationship between parts and different sections of our designs. So one of the primary benefits of shadows is the ability to add a nice 3D effect to your designs and projects. Now previously designs had a tendency to be quite flat, which can be a bit boring and plain, so shadows are a great way to navigate this flat design to a more 3D look. Now when using shadows, you should use them sparingly. You shouldn't go crazy with designs, basically meaning that you don't use shadows for the sake of using shadows. If your website is more serious and elegant, you probably use less shadows, whereas a more playful website will likely have more shadows. Now you should also aim to make them quite light and not too dark. Making them too dark just looks pretty bad in my opinion, and just not that natural. And of course the ultimate goal here is to use shadows to grab attention to a specific section of your website, or have a bit more of an emphasis on a certain section on your web page. And then finally, shadows are great to use on buttons and hover effects, which I'm going to demonstrate in VS Code now. Now as I mentioned, shadows are a great way to add visual detail and a 3D look to our designs, as well as giving attention to certain sections of your website. And one of the sections I want a lot of attention to is our most popular destinations. So what we're going to do is add a shadow to each of the different locations. So we'll head inside the style sheet and we'll go to our popular destinations, go inside the class of holiday, which is wrapping around the image and the rest of the content here. And what we're going to do is grab the box shadow property, and the first two values you put in here on the X and Y, but we don't want to shadow just on the X and Y, we want to shadow all the way around each of the popular destinations. So we'll just put 0, 0 here. And to put a shadow all the way around, we add a blur. So we're just going to put in here a 3 pixel blur. And as you can see, if we look at our destinations, there's a shadow that goes around each of the boxes now, which gives the section a much more distinct look. It's not on just one flat background, and even looks a little bit more 3D. Now there are a couple more values you can add to the box shadow, and I do have a 5 Minute Fridays episode if you guys want to check that out. But we can also change the color of our shadows. So we can say, let's say we want the color to be red. We now have a red shadow, but again, there are more values we can apply here. But if you guys want a more in-depth look on the box shadow property, check out my 5 Minute Fridays episode on it. But what we're going to do is just revert this back to its default, which is just black. Now, as I mentioned in the slides, combining the hover pseudo class and shadows, you can create pretty cool effects. So we're going to create a hover effect on the main button here. So we'll go up to the button, which is the button big, and we'll just grab the button class or the button big class, add the hover effect onto this, or the hover pseudo class, sorry, and then we're just going to have a box shadow 0 on the X and Y, and then about 3 pixel blur, and we'll make the color black. Now if I hover over this main button, you'll see the shadow pop up, which kind of gives it a nice 3D effect and turns the design from a static one to a more dynamic one. Now the 6th ingredient may seem insignificant, but border radius is actually pretty important because it can really give a different feel to a website on whether it's more serious or more playful. So direct straight edges indicate a more serious website, whereas the more rounded edges make the website appear more fun and playful. So as I just mentioned, using the border radius property is much more likely to decrease the seriousness of your design. And where you typically see the use of border radius is around buttons and images, which we're going to be applying in just a moment. And the good thing about border radius is that it can be applied to all corners or just specific corners, which can create quite cool designs. So let's head into VS Code now and apply the border radius to our images and buttons. Now, because this website is more on the playful side and not tended to be as serious, we can apply a border radius to a lot of the content to increase its playfulness and reduce the seriousness. So the first bit of border radius we will apply is for the main button here, which has a class of BTN big. So I want to apply the border radius on all sides, so we just grab the border radius property and let's give it about 20 pixels on all sides. And you can see immediately now this button appears much more playful and loses its seriousness, which is what we're trying to do here. So we're also going to be applying the border radius to the image. So if we scroll down here to the image, now this is going to apply it to all the images. So we'll grab the border radius and let's do the same, say about 20 pixels. You can immediately see applying the border radius and reducing those sharp cut edges increases its playfulness. Now, as I mentioned in the slides, border radius can be applied to different sides. It doesn't have to apply to all of the sides that we've just been doing. So if we scroll down to the popular destinations, I want the bottom left and the bottom right to be straight, and I want the border radius to be on the top left and top right. So to do that, we'll scroll down to the holiday section, and first actually I want to apply the border radius to each of the cards, because you can see these aren't rounded. I want these to appear less serious too. So we're just going to set a border radius of about 20 pixels here. And you can see now that's looking much better around the edges. Now again, I want to make these corners here straight. So to do that, I'm going to go to the holiday images here. And I'm just going to say border radius. We'll say 20 pixels on the top left, 20 pixels on the top right, and then 0, 0 for the bottom left and bottom right. And you can see here now these are straight, but the top and left of the images is rounded. So I think that looks a lot better and really complements the rest of the content. Now, if we scroll down to the next section, you see these images are looking a lot better in my opinion now, because they've got those rounded edges, which again is what we're trying to do to reduce the seriousness of this website. Now, what we can also do is apply the border radius to a whole section. So I want this section here to also be less serious. So we apply the border radius to this whole section. So that whole section is a testimonial section, and it's this class here. And then what we do is just apply the border radius here, so 20 pixels on all corners. You can see now that testimonial looks a lot more friendly and just matches the rest of the content. Now, one section we still need to apply the border radius to is these buttons here, which are the button small. So if we scroll up to just below button big, so button small, and we'll apply the border radius to these two because I want these to be less serious. So border radius, let's apply 20 pixels to these two. And you can see now these buttons look a lot better. And there you go, guys. Just using one property of border radius, you can see how we've changed the whole feel of this website. We've reduced the seriousness of the design significantly, and I think looks really, really good. Now we only have 2 more ingredients left, guys, and number 7 is white space. Now white space is technically invisible, but easily one of the easiest ways to drastically improve designs, and the right amount of white space makes designs look clean, modern and polished. So what exactly is white space? Now it essentially is just space between spaces. White space communicates how different pieces of information are related to one another, and as mentioned, this results in much better web design. So a common question is where to use white space. Firstly, you should aim to use tons of white space between sections, and you should also use a lot of white space between groups of elements to give it that polished look. Now another good tip would be to use white space instead of lines, and when I mean lines I mean actual physical lines, because adding physical lines can give it an ugly and less modern look in my opinion. Now in regards to how much white space, think of the law of proximity. Now what this essentially means is that any element that belongs together should be closer to each other. So for example, icons, headings and paragraph would have less white space between them, and then anything out of these group of elements would have more white space between them. Now another good tip would be first add too much white space and then go from there. So if you need to reduce it, you can reduce it. And lastly, it's best to use a similar auto typography by having a tool system so you can stay consistent. And all of this results in something like this. So you can see adding white space greatly improves the design of your website and just looks much more modern, clean and polished. So now let's dive into VS Code and add some white space. Alright guys, so inside VS Code and looking at our website, you can see we actually have quite a good level of white space in most of the elements. So the only bit I really want to apply the white space to is this special section. So I want to apply a bit more space between each of these elements, just to give them a bit more breather room because I feel like they're a bit too cramped. So to do that, I'm going to use the spacing system here, which is similar to our typography, and I'm going to grab 16 to 32, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here where we have the specials box, and I'm just going to grab the margin property, and let's first put that spacing system here, and let's try 16 pixels first, see what that looks like. And you can see that looks pretty good, but I think I want a bit more on there, so let's try 24 pixels, see what that looks like. Yeah, and I think that looks a lot better now. And the last bit I want to do here is actually just touch on the text, so I'm just going to add a bit of padding to push that in a bit more. So let's say 16 pixels, just so it pushes the text in a bit more, and I think now that looks a lot better. So that's all we really need for our white space, but again, it's a very important concept to know when designing your website, as it can greatly improve them and reduce that crampiness look and feeling. So the last ingredient for awesome web design is establishing visual hierarchy. Now visual hierarchy is about establishing which elements of a design are the most important ones. It's about drawing attention to that most important part of the element and the key to guiding users throughout your website. So again, this is a very powerful concept you should be aware of to achieve awesome web design. Now a couple of tips here is that you should position important stuff at the top of the page, as this is where things naturally get more attention. And images are probably the most powerful element and most likely to draw attention to things almost immediately before anything else, so be mindful of images. So if we take a look through our website, you can see visual hierarchy has already been established without you even realizing. So the first section here, we're immediately drawn to a nice image of a holiday, then our attention will likely be drawn to the button here, and then finally the small paragraph. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this visual hierarchy. I'm subconsciously guiding the user through my web page. Now in the second section here, we first have the image straight away, then the subheading, which is quite bold and bigger than the other text, so you immediately know the location, and then you know the price, and then your attention will be drawn to the other details of that section. And again, if we scroll down to this section here, what makes our holiday special, this is a pretty similar situation. So we have the image, the larger text, and then the smaller text again, so we're guiding our users through each section. And with the testimonial section here, you can see the size of the text helps with this section in regards to visual hierarchy. So we're drawn to the image and then the quote, which is bigger than the paragraph, and then finally we have who wrote the paragraph, so putting a name to the faces of this image. So that is essentially the concept of visual hierarchy. So you must keep this concept in mind for your designs, as you want to guide your users correctly and efficiently. You don't want them being confused while navigating through your website. So those were my ingredients, guys, for awesome web design. This was a pretty long video, and thank you very much if you've watched it this far. Now I promise that when combining all these ingredients together, you will vastly improve your designs and make you more than just a programmer. You will also have the skills of a web designer, which will put you guys in a very high pedestal. Now if you guys enjoyed the content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.